but I do remember it, by the way. I really do, and there's a lot of people laughing that remember it too in this room. So, but I'm not sure what I guess we're trying to accomplish, because it seems as though we've been able to move forward since the constitutional amendment. So, can you give me some examples of what we're trying to accomplish with if this was put on the ballot and adopted by the people?
As I understand it, it's to address that legal fiction that we've created with the non-intoxicating beer. We do have in code some workarounds, but bars and things like that that are licensed to sell liquor are not considered a public space. This would allow the legislature, if it wished, to address that issue. It's to address the legal fiction.
But they're not. You say they're not a public space, but an Applebee's sells liquor. It's more of a public space, isn't it?
Yes, except the license is considered a private club license to sell liquor. And so that can create some uniqueness in the law. It's to address that legal fiction that it's a private club versus a public space.
I mean, I remember you had to have a private club, you had to have 100 members, you had to do membership cards. I remember all that. So, but somehow we've been able to move past that. And that's what I'm trying to understand. Maybe somebody from ABC could help me, Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time.
At the appropriate time. Further questions? Gentleman from Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, would this say that if, like the stores that have to get a license now to sell liquor, if this all went in effect, would this say that anybody could just open up a store and sell non-intoxicating alcohol?
No, sir. In fact, it would not. It would simply allow the legislature to have the authority to set whatever legislation it feels appropriate on that. It would not invalidate any current code. It would not open this up to new people. It just addresses that legal fiction that's been created.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further question? Gentleman lady from Fayette.
I believe, and I may be wrong, please correct me, that WVU was able to sell beer inside the stadium because it was non-intoxicating. Would that make it so that West Virginia University at their football games can no longer sell beer because it's not, I don't know how you would define the Coliseum as a...
No. And I'm sorry if I'm being a little confusing on this. The current non-intoxicating beer and wine is not so restricted to be that it has to be in a private club. That would not change.
And so why does it say alcohol? Because I'm pretty sure beer has alcohol in it.
But that addresses the legal fiction that I've been discussing. The non-intoxicating beer is not limited to the brands that have extremely low or no alcohol content. Non-intoxicating beer is essentially the beer that most people think of. It's the major brands that you think of. It's that legal fiction that's been created to address this issue. It's because the Constitution, instead of using the term alcohol as this amendment proposes, it uses the term intoxicating liquors. And this would strike that word or that phrase and replace it with alcohol. It would give the legislature control over all alcohol to do as it sees fit. The only restrictions the Constitution currently places on, that we're talking about here, is the consumption and sale of liquor, not beer or wine, but liquor in public places. And this would strike that to give the legislature the authority to set what parameters it deems appropriate.
Could you just, in a couple brief sentences, tell me, if this got passed, what would change? Where could I go someplace and buy?
In the immediate impact would be none.
Okay, but let's say 10 years from now.
It would be up to the will of the legislature to set whatever laws that it deems appropriate. It's possible that it would continue as is, but we would address that legal fiction, or have the opportunity to address the legal fiction of the non-intoxicating beer. And I say legal fiction, I know that's a term of art, and that's confusing for some of the members, but it's the way that we've addressed the way the Constitution is written. So short term, nothing changes. Long term, it would be up to the will of the body.
And that could change each time different legislature comes in.
Certainly.
Certainly, thank you.
Gentleman from Upshur.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So would this be able to help relieve some of the conflicting issues that we have with county and city governments, and the fact that, for example, the city might say no smoking in a public place, and so that law goes towards these bars and restaurants, like a bar/restaurant. But technically, with the state, it's registered as a private club. So there's a conflicting interest with them saying that they're a private club in the state, but the city's putting an ordinance saying you can't smoke in a public place.
Yes and no.
That's for an example.
Yes and no in my reading of, in my understanding of that. We have the private club license, and so for the ABC purposes, it is considered a private club. However, it is still generally public in that I believe the anti-discrimination laws would still apply to it, to coming into these facilities.
Thank you.
Gentleman from Brook.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Arlie, could you said here a couple of times that it would give the legislature the ability to deem what they think appropriate in the future. Could you give me an example of what possibly that could be?
I'm hesitant to guess at the will of the body, but
I'm hesitant to understand.
fair enough. It's really up to the will of the body. Currently, for example, and one of the more obvious things in this is the prohibition on the consumption or sale of liquor in a public space.
Okay, well, you keep saying that, and I continually saying I don't understand, and you
Right,
say the will of the legislature. Somebody had to want to do this for some reason. So has anyone ever thrown any reason out there of this is what this bill could do?
Not in conversations I've had.
Thank you.
Gentleman from Wood.
Thank you. Not today, but someday we ought to go back and redo the definitions, because I can, more times than I like to admit, have been intoxicated on beer. And if you don't think it ain't intoxicating, drink about a six-pack, unless you could hold it better than I could. But, if you drink 3 beers, I think you're over .08. You're drunk driving. So sometime we ought to go back and redo all these definitions and what a private club is, and we all know that's a big farce. And to call it non-intoxicating is a big farce. And I don't drink wine. I never have drunk it, but I've seen people get kind of silly on it. So it's intoxicating, and I think we ought to come up with realistic definitions and create a clean law that defines everything. Thank you.
And I do believe that's what this legislation, this constitutional amendment, if adopted, would do.
Would it change the definition of beer?
Use mic, sir.
Would it change the definition of beer? Excuse me.
Beer would no longer be considered need to be considered non-intoxicating beer. It would just be, you could just call it beer.
Okay, thank you.
Gentleman from Monongalia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we've already considered a lot of bills over the last few weeks related to alcohol, right? So isn't it true that the legislature already can make policy decisions related to alcohol?
Yes, but we have to be careful with the restrictions in the Constitution, and we have to be very careful with our wording to sort of carefully avoid the restrictions that the Constitution places on us. This would, as I believe the short title says, give the legislature more freedom to establish the policy that it deems appropriate.
So that's really the point here, is not that we're the legislature would have any new authority or would be poised to change the law other than to do away with those legal fictions so we could have cleaner laws on the books that reflect reality.
I think that's a reasonable statement.
Okay, thanks.
Gentleman from Putnam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Council, just for clarification, would this help end prohibition?
I believe federal prohibition went out many years ago.
But we still kind of have it here on the state level. That's why we define it as non-intoxicating beer. Is that not correct?
Yes, essentially.
So say I wanted to remove the maximum ABV limit off of non-intoxicating beer, I could do that under this.
The legislature could do that if that was the will of the body.
All right, thank you.
Further questions of council? Gentleman from Berkeley.
Just one quick question, and excuse my ignorance, but would this have any impact if I went to Walmart and bought rubbing alcohol?
No.
Okay.
Different type of alcohol. I would recommend not drinking it.
I could buy it before 10 a.m. in the morning. Okay,
Yes.
thanks.
Further questions of council? I have a couple, council. The legal fictions we've created in state code aside, looking purely at the Constitution, would a Budweiser be legal to sell in West Virginia?
If it were considered an intoxicating liquor, then no. If it's this would make it much more clear what is and is not permissible.
So if this amendment were to pass, we would no longer basically have to lie in state code and pretend Budweiser is non-intoxicating.
I think that's probably right.
Thank you. With leave of committee, I believe the gentleman from Marion requested someone from ABC, and I see someone from ABC, so. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you should give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name and who you're with for the record.
Anoop Basin, West Virginia ABCA General Counsel.
The gentleman from Marion.
Hey, Mr. Chairman. Anoop, I'm trying to sort through this. I mean, we've got a whole host of ABC laws on the books in West Virginia, correct?
We've got a lot.
And I mean, do you know of any that's been challenged constitutionally that would prevent us from operating the way we do? I mean, I think, and I know this isn't a question, Mr. Chairman. I'm just trying to make a point. I think we do a pretty good job in regulating our establishments under the guise we have, and without revisiting the constitutional amendment, we've been able to move forward. Is that a pretty fair statement?
Yeah, most of the case law that's out there is pretty well settled, probably 30, 40 years ago at least. We haven't really had any new challenges to any of the terms, I think, that have been thrown around. I would probably disagree with counsel a little bit. Intoxicating liquors are liquor, wine, and beer, meaning beer that's over 12% alcohol by volume. I would agree with him that there is a legal fiction for non-intoxicating beer, which probably at Prohibition was 0.5%. They called it near beer. And then over the years, obviously Prohibition ended. Over the years, it's gradually increased from 3.2 to 6 to 12, and I think there's a bill out there to raise the non-intoxicating beer threshold to 15% alcohol by volume. So we've been able to work within these legal fictions. I think the constitutional amendment or proposal would address consumption of alcohol in public. I think is kind of what it says currently. Section 46 there is that you can't consume intoxicating liquors, meaning liquor, wine, beer above the 12% in public. So we've created a private club act, which allowed for bars. It gives what we call a dome of privacy over these locations where you can consume alcohol there. I don't know that alcohol is necessarily defined. I think that might be something that had to be defined a little clearer in the amendment. I know alcoholic liquors is defined in the code and intoxicating liquors. So that's something that you might want to consider as well.
If this were adopted and put on the ballot and it failed, could you foresee that creating some problems for ABC?
I guess it depends how the question would be worded on the ballot. If it was just on the question of making the change, essentially the change wouldn't happen if it failed, is the way I would.
But could it open up more, well, I don't know if that's a fair statement. I guess could it open up more challenges?
I think it's probably the opposite. If it passed, I think you could open up some challenges because I think the legislature would then, I think as Arlie kind of said, is I think you would need to look at changing. So what we have is a Non-Intoxicating Beer Act in Chapter 11, Article 16. And then in Chapter 60, we have the control of alcoholic liquors, which is liquor and wine. I think you'd have to look at changing some of that language to comport with the Constitution if it changed.
Thank you, Noop. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have.
Further questions? Gentleman from Mercer.
There we go. Thank you for being here this morning. I think it's not a secret I would be different for reasons that I would not want this to go through. But I just want to ask you just to look at things from the other side. In your opinion, as you are the legal counsel for the ABC Commission. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you believe that this constitutional amendment, if passed, could cause problems for your industry in the future. Is that correct?
It would create uncertainty. Uncertainty usually leads to litigation.
And litigation is not something I would say the ABC would like to indulge in if it is unnecessary. Is that correct?
We like to keep our litigation low, yes.
Yes, very well. Thank you so much.
Gentleman from Monongalia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you mentioned that by claiming that bars are private clubs, which is how they're currently handled, right, that there's a dome of privacy, I think you talked about. Can you explain what that means?
That's probably more, it's kind of been handed down to me before I've been doing this about 10, 12 years, and it was handed down to me as by way of the Constitution, which the Constitution says you can't drink in public. In theory, the only two private places I'm aware of are one's home, and this is defined in the code, and a private club. So those are kind of the two areas. Now, we've created other licenses over time. We have private wine restaurants where you can consume wine. We have other fair and festival licenses and things like that to try to comport with the Constitution over time.
Right, okay. Because I think one of the reasons why this is important, at least in Morgantown, is that we have a major problem with underage drinking in our bars downtown and a challenge in enforcing the underage drinking laws in these bars that are clearly public places, but they're sort of pretend to be private clubs.
Well, and again, that's another legal issue. You're getting into constitutional law. The police can't just go into a business, no matter what type of business, for police purpose, to just roust people or go there with not a warrant. They need to get a warrant. They have to have search and seizure laws. There's a bunch of constitutional law that's not even anything to do with alcohol law that gets into that area of whether the police can go into a business or not.
Okay, but isn't the way the Constitution is written part of the reason why city police can't enforce the underage drinking laws in Morgantown?
It's the reason they can't come into your home, the reason they can't go into your place of work without having a warrant, having a reason to come in, having to go to a judge to get that. that's beyond me a little bit as far as that's constitutional law, but I think those are the reasons why policemen just couldn't come into a bar per se and do whatever he wants. Now, under the law, and we're looking at passing legislation that the state police can assist ABC agents, because we're going in for an administrative purpose, not a criminal purpose. And so I think we've added language in a bill this year that allows local law enforcement to also assist the ABCA in doing its administrative work. And obviously, if a police officer sees something illegal committed in their presence, then they can act upon that.
And I'm not suggesting that police officers should be able to just go into any private business and do whatever they want. Obviously, there's constitutional, limits on what can be done. But aren't there opportunities from time to time for enforcing underage drinking that local police are prevented from doing based on
I don't know what would
Constitution?
prevent them if they have a tip or, some other information that illegal activities going on in there. They go get a warrant and they send in their own undercover folks in, whether it's a law firm, whether it's a car wash, whether it's a bar. I think as long as they have the probable cause, they shouldn't be barred from that.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions of our presenter? Gentleman from Brook.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today. Delegate from the 50th asked earlier, what about like an Applebee's? Is that considered a private club if they sell liquor in there?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
If they're serving liquor, wine, or beer.
Okay. And if this amendment passes, would this help what the gentleman from Morgantown is asking? Is this going to help in any way to deter underage drinking?
The way I would read it is they would still need a license of some fashion. It may not be called a private club license, but it would still be a business operating. I would presume they would have some constitutional protections, just like any other business.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions? Gentleman from Monongalia.
I guess only those of us who are older than me and the gentleman from Marion would remember how all this came about with the private club liquor law. There was back in the 60s, there was a lot of pressure for liquor by the drink, and the way the legislature decided to arrive at that was through the private club liquor law, which essentially made all bars and restaurants private clubs, and kind of those of us who were around back then remember when we had a wallet full of membership cards for the restaurants and bars that we like to go to, and I guess even the ABC even had the power at that point in time to even come in and card people, find somebody drinking without a membership card, the bar could be charged. I just wonder if you would think that it would be beneficial for the legislature it would remove some ambiguities from the law if the legislature were able to, kind of get rid of some of this with the private clubs, and allow open sale without any of these strings attached, which seem to have gone by the wayside anyway, since we no longer have membership cards. But would it be beneficial for the legislature to have that power?
I guess currently we do go in, and we still card people. We go in, we work with local and state police currently, and do that wherever the bar is located. We do underage compliance. We do over-service. We do a lot of front end. We do some training on the front end as well before anybody would get in trouble per se. I think you would still need some kind of a license structure to control the licenses. I don't think you'd want anybody just setting up on the side of the road doing lemonade stands of liquor. So I think you'd want some degree of control, and that's kind of what the state's been organized as a control system. We license folks, there's a license for this, there's a license for that, and I think that's where we get the control. Ultimately, if somebody's not doing what they should be doing or doing it properly, we will go and take their license, sanction them, then take their license.
Right, thank you.
Further questions? Gentlelady from Monongalia.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. So I have a question. If this amendment would pass, will the bars have to get a different type of license now that they would no longer be private and public? And what would be, do you have an estimate of how much that would cost if that would need to happen?
I think council kind of said it would be somewhat to a degree up to the legislature. I would think you wouldn't need the name a private club necessarily anymore. I think that would create confusion if such a thing passed, such a resolution passed. It's hard to say. I mean, it's like I think I said before, it's an uncertainty where things have been litigated probably 30, 40 years ago. There is a degree of certainty. I know if you don't hear this stuff every day, it's confusing a little bit. And obviously I deal with it every day. So we work through it. Most of the bars and people who have licenses, they all figure it out. Sometimes it's a little bit of an education for everybody, but I think that's just the uncertainty with change. I think there probably would need to be some changes. When you're making those changes, other things change typically. So I think that would create a degree of uncertainty. I have no idea if there would be zero cost or millions of dollars of cost. I couldn't tell you.
Thank you. Further questions? I have a couple here. Being that the amendment, should it pass, says the legislature shall, by appropriate legislation, regulate the manufacture and sale of alcohol within the limits of the state, you wouldn't be able to sell any alcohol without a license. You couldn't just set up your alcoholic lemonade stand along the road without getting a license first.
It depends what the legislature would do. I think it would be within the legislature's control. It is today. It is today, and it would be after that.
But being the legislature has the ability to control this, none of the current laws would change, would just go into effect. So private clubs would still exist and still be able to sell alcohol should this pass.
Correct. I think the question is, would it change any of the legal case law or legal standing? That I'm not sure.
But it would eliminate the legal fiction of non-intoxicating beer. Or at least eliminate the need for it.
I think that's probably a better statement, that you wouldn't be required to call it non-intoxicating beer. It would still be called it, and that would be up to the legislature to change.
And we have, I guess I would call them, a fair amount of legal fiction because of the way our Constitution is currently written. Like you were saying about a public place, you can't serve alcohol or consume alcohol in a public place, yet you talked, I think you called it a dome of privacy. I know down here, I think it's on Capitol Street, there's a restaurant that has a fenced-in area that's essentially on the sidewalk, and for all reality, that is a very public place. You're sitting there you can reach out, touch the people on the sidewalk. However, we can
under the dome.
That dome's pretty thin there, but
yep.
So, I mean, we could eliminate a lot of these legal fictions out of our code, and our code would be straightforward and simple to follow in regards to alcohol.
You would have to make those changes, correct?
Right. Okay. Thank you. Gentleman from Brook.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there a reason that the beer industry is so heavily regulated? Wouldn't that be consumer protection?
Well, the difference, they always say alcohol is different, and it's not diapers, it's not Coca-Cola. It's a product, when not used correctly, it is, I think, I was reading something today, it's one of the third, I think, they worded it funny, third largest killers of people, that's, I guess, like a self-induced, people would consume it on their choice. So it's still a regulated product. You know, they compare, back in the day, they compare the conversation we're having today about marijuana with alcohol. It was the marijuana of its time, I guess, before, obviously, it's become more commonplace and people use it all the time safely. But occasionally not safely. So I think that's where the regulation comes in. I mean, we don't regulate the antitrust side of it. We regulate the manufacture, sale, consumption. I think that's at the legislature's direction.
So if this passed, would you still be able to regulate the manufacturer? Is this going to open us up for some bootleg liquor? Would we still have that? Would you still regulate the manufacturing?
I'm just reading the paper here. It just says regulate the manufacture and sale of alcohol. I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to go look what alcohol is defined as.
I think we were talking about maybe changing that for the reason of this being here, because we were going to change it to alcohol. And my fear with this is that this is just going to hurt our West Virginia distributors. This is going to open this up, and my fear would be to bootleg or out-of-state liquor that I'm not sure where it comes from. I guess that's my opinion, but thank you, sir.
Gentleman from Monongalia. You're still from Monongalia.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Bushin, for being here again. We've been talking about non-intoxicating beer, and I guess that's kind of, I don't really think that's how it's defined in the code. I think it's non-intoxicating alcoholic beverage, which is how beer is defined. Do we still have a beer commission?
No, that merged before my time, I think late 70s, 80s. And so it's part of the alcohol beverage control.
So it's within the ABC now.
Correct.
Is that, are you under the state tax department or we're an independent agency or?
We're under the Department of Revenue.
Pardon me?
The Department of Revenue.
Oh, okay. All right. All right, that's all. Only question. Thank you.
Further questions? If not, thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Further questions? Amendments? Discussion? Gentleman from Marion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman. I certainly am not going to try to say that our laws aren't antiquated, and there's a lot of things out there that we've been able to do. Some may agree is constitutional, and some may disagree with that. But to open up the Constitution on something, in my opinion, that's just this broad, I think it brings a lot of confusion to the industry, and I agree with the presenter that it would certainly bring a lot of uncertainty to West Virginia, whichever side of that issue you wind up on. You know, I think this is something that we really should take a extremely hard look at, Mr. Chairman. I agree with you in part, but I don't think it's something we should move on this late in the legislature without at least having a good study throughout the interims and bringing in experts that can tell us, what could happen good for West Virginia if we do this, and what could be bad for West Virginia if we do this. I just don't feel that I have enough information right now to vote yes to put something of this magnitude on as a constitutional amendment. I'm certainly concerned about the underage drinking. To my friend in Monongalia, it is a big concern, and I'm your next door neighbor. I live 15 miles from the university, but I still think there's a lot of things in place to combat that, and I think that ABC needs to do that. I think they can take law enforcement in with them. I don't know that this constitutional amendment does anything to fix that problem. The legislature has a lot of control over alcohol in West Virginia, as we've seen a lot of alcohol bills go through here in the last couple weeks. I've seen a lot go through, certainly in my tenure here. I just think it's a bad idea to open up the Constitution so rapidly without at least having opinions of a lot of experts to tell us what the ramifications of this would be. So I'll be voting no, and I would encourage the rest of the committee to vote no as well.
Gentleman from Upshur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to speak in favor of the amendment, or the bill. As someone who operates a bar, I can see how this could help reduce regulation in the future. I also like to say that we have some great sponsors on this bill. I am a sponsor on the bill, along with Delegate Howell and Hamrick and Flushhour. And I hope that we do pass this. This is going to Judiciary next if we pass out of here. And I know they can take another look at this. And I think we should pass it. Thank you.
Further discussion? If not, motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to report House Joint Resolution 26 to the floor with recommendation that it be adopted, but first be referred to the Committee on the Judiciary.
Question before us is on the gentleman's motion. Roll call has been demanded. Is the demand sustained? Demand sustained. Clerk will call the roll.
Vice Chairman Pack. No. Delegate Angelucci. Delegate Azinger. Yay. Delegate Bibby. Yay. Delegate Cadle. Yay. Delegate Caputo. No. Delegate DeSerio. No. Delegate Hansen. Yes. Delegate Hicks. Delegate Hott. Yes. Delegate Jeffries D. Yes. Delegate Jeffries J. Yes. Delegate Martin. Yes. Delegate Nelson. No. Delegate Painter. Delegate Phillips. Yes. Delegate Porterfield. No. Delegate Piles. Yes. Delegate Staggers. Yes. Delegate Swartzmiller. No. Delegate Seipold. Yes. Delegate Tomlin. No. Delegate Walker. No. Delegate Worrell. No. And Chairman Howell.
There being 13 yeas, 9 nays, motion carries. Next item on the agenda, consideration of committee substitute for SB 117 relating to incentives for consolidating local governments. Council will explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the committee substitute for Senate Bill 117. The bill creates an incentives for consolidation at the municipal, county, and metro government levels. The terms are redefined throughout the bill to allow for certain benefits to be made available to consolidated local government. In particular, consolidated municipalities may take advantage of additional powers that are currently reserved for the Class 1 and 2 municipalities or counties. It's spelled out in 711B4, include the authority to create development and redevelopment districts, exercise eminent domain, receive grants from the federal government, make decisions about public sidewalks, construct capital improvements, and enter into intergovernmental agreements. Further, a new section is created to delineate incentives that consolidated governments can receive. For municipal consolidations, that's a matching payment from the state equal to 20% of the annual municipal actuarial contribution to the Municipal Benefit Fund for 10 years, 2 complete audits conducted by the state auditor, preference for road construction projects under consideration by the Division of Highways, and the right to impose a 1% sales tax that's capped at the combined of 7%. For county consolidation, you also get that 1% sales tax, preference for road construction projects under consideration by the Division of Highways, and 10% discount on the county's monthly regional jail bill for 10 years. For metro government consolidation, all of the incentives that I've just mentioned would be available. Finally, the current limitations of a consolidated local government that exempt public school districts, library districts, and fire districts from the scope of any consolidation are eliminated. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions of council? Are there amendments? Oh, gentleman from Hancock.
Council, the part in there where municipalities, if they would, I guess, combine, would have first preference from the state on roads consideration, I think it says. How would that work? I mean, would that be a state road running through the city?
I think that's probably correct. Many of the roads that are typically associated with municipalities are often state roads. So I believe that would be for those roads.
So if a city combined, the state would have to give them preference over a road running through their city versus other roads within the county or district?
Versus other roads which the Division of Highways would be planning to do construction or repair projects on.
So this would supersede that?
Yes, although the level of preference isn't defined. So, pardon? How the preference would work is not defined, so I don't know if a road is in such need that if that would change its priority level. It just simply, per the bill, gives preference.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions of council? Gentleman from Kanawha.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Marley, so let's start with this audit. Can you give a little more background on what's provided here, or what the incentive is?
This bill is
Are they audited right now?
I don't know the extent of the audit schedules for municipalities, if there is one. What the bill provides would be an audit including recommendations for additional efficiencies by the state auditor within 12 months of the approved consolidation, and then a second audit 36 months after the approved consolidation.
Who pays for that?
The bill does not specify, so it would be my reading that it would be the state auditor's office that would do so.
Okay, and then as we flip to that last page, and it speaks about a discount of 10% from the regional jail bill for a period of 10 years. Do we know what that equates to?
I don't, because
I guess there isn't a fiscal note, is there?
I think there may be, although I don't see one here with me. There may be somebody here who could better address that than I could on the fiscal impact.
All right, and who would pick up that 10%?
Well, I think that would be the state.
Okay. Well, if there's, Mr. Chairman, if there's someone at the appropriate time, thank you.
Gentleman from Cabell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got a question here on, when we talk about the municipalities and the counties for the 1% sales and use tax, that it shall not result in a combined sales and use tax rate over 7%. Is that in combination with the state sales tax?
Yeah, we're talking about the state sales tax in combination, yes, sir.
So, just throwing out a hypothetical, so if we increase the state sales tax to 7%, then these municipalities and counties would no longer be able to impose their 1% tax. Is that correct?
Without also adjusting this code.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Further questions of council? If not, with leave of committee, is there anyone here that can speak to this? You. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you give shall be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay, I do.
Please state your name and who you're with for the record.
My name is Stacy Nowicki Eldridge. I'm Deputy General Counsel for Department of Military Affairs and Public Safety.
Gentleman from Kanawha.
Well, I don't think that qualifies you for my first question on the audit, but The second one, as it relates to the 10% discount that's offered up to the counties for a 10-year period, can you explain who would cover?
I don't know. This is not a Department of Military Affairs bill, so I cannot tell you what the intent of the legislation would be, Delegate.
So what is the monthly charge for regional jail billings right now?
I can talk about the per diem. Right now, because of last year's House Bill 4338, the counties have locked in their per diem charge for a period of a total of 3 years, and we're about halfway into the first year of that 3 years of $48.25.
So 48, so if we call that 50 times 30 days, so that's roughly $1,500. So maybe we come back to $150 roughly. You'll take my...
It would depend, obviously, Delegate, as I know you're well aware of how many people were incarcerated and for what period of time.
And I think this obviously is an appropriate incentive to do this, but could you speak to the administrative issues, one good, bad, or indifferent, that this may bring on your group?
As a lot of the members are aware, the regional jail bonds are still active from the construction of the regional jails. And some of the per diem, a loss of per diem would mean that we would have to divert funds from other pots, so to speak, to cover some of those bonding issues. The special revenue accounts run the jail units, and the special revenue accounts are funded from the per diem charge.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions of our presenter? If not, thank you. Further questions? You have a question of council? Gentleman from Raleigh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Arlie, does this, in essence, give counties or municipalities that combine kind of carte blanche to raise a sales tax?
Up to a combined with the state of 7%, yeah, they could add that 1%.
So this does allow for a 1% increase for counties outside of the home rule.
It does, although it does have some consolidation requirements, but yes.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Gentleman from Monongalia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question about the road construction and repair preference. Do you have a sense of how that would be implemented, how far up in line they'd be able to jump?
Unfortunately, no. I don't have any more information than what you see in front of you.
All right.
It's that it would be preference for any road construction or repair projects under consideration with the Division of Highways. That's all I have.
Is there anybody from DOH here?
Not that I see.
Thank you.
Further questions? Gentleman from Kanawha.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so to follow up on the sales tax question, the way I read this is it's very open-ended and not necessarily subject to a referendum?
Correct.
So as you read this, who would be able to impose that? The county commissioners? Or the mayor? Or what? Whom?
It would be the authority of the newly combined or consolidated municipal or county or combined government would be able to impose that.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions of council? Well, council, I have one kind of following point. If they combine governments, do we end up with who ends up being the government? Is there a code section that would say it's the county commission and the city just dissolves and becomes part of it? Or are we electing people from the city, or?
There are some provisions on that. There is in Chapter 7A, Article 5. It's an article on municipal consolidation and how the elections format, how they process. It involves the approval of a consolidation and charter, which would establish a lot of those provisions and how that would all function.
So a new charter would be created for this county city.
Yes.
And they would decide whether they want to have a city council, a county commission, or whatever run the entire county at that point, I guess.
That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you. Further questions? Gentlelady from Fayette.
Sorry, just one quick question. There's an urban area that stretches from Fayetteville all the way down to Sophia. That crosses county lines. Does this limit it to a county? Or could this urban area called Beckley, Fayetteville, Sophia be allowed to consolidate and become a big city?
I don't immediately see any restriction that it be within side of a one county border.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions of council? Are there amendments? Discussion? Gentleman from Raleigh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would urge rejection of this bill for two reasons in particular. One is that I'm not ready at this point personally to just cede the imposition of sales tax statewide yet without some other oversight from this body. And second of all, in the fiscal note, it notes that that there may be an impact to the Division of Corrections Rehabilitations. It's my understanding that the regional jails operate based on their expenses, and we have counties that are already struggling, and some are months and months and months behind on the regional jail bill. And I would be hesitant to allow something to take place that would cause them to fall further behind, Mr. Chairman, and it's for those two reasons that I would oppose this bill.
Further wishing to speak to the bill? Gentleman from Kanawha.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, this is a tough one because the overall goal here is, I think, whatever we can do in this state to provide incentives in the right manner, and I'll restate the right manner, to bring municipalities and counties and maybe even school boards together. I think some of the issues that have been brought out maybe are not the appropriate incentives at this time, especially for this body. And depending on how this vote goes, Mr. Chairman, this would be a perfect subject for you and your committee to take on during the interims as it relates to what can we do here as the state of West Virginia in looking to improve the efficiencies of the government services that are delivered. And if that's through combinations, so be it. But with that said, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to speak in favor of this. There's several examples. I think if Cabell, Putnam, and Kanawha would combine together, there'd be one of the 50 biggest metropolitan areas in the United States. And according to what I've heard, that would enable them to better able to attract new employment. We have too much government in this state. There's 25% of the counties in West Virginia have less than 15,000 people. The county contiguous to Wood has 5,500 people. Their budget's $650,000, and $400,000 of that goes for salaries and administrative purposes. For instance, if somebody between Parkersburg and Williamstown calls the police, the deputy sheriffs have to go through 2 other cities to get there. So I think it would enable a great deal of consolidation, elimination of some very high salaries, so money could be used to further enhance police protection. And I think this is something that would really be good for the state. Thank you.
Gentleman from Cabell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a proponent of home rule and think that there are some great ideas here to consolidate local governments, but I just feel like this is painting too much of a broad stroke here. We basically have about 1 page of new code here, and I think it's too general. I was quite surprised to see the Senate pass this 32-0. But I agree with the gentleman from Kanawha and Chairman. I think this is something that could be vetted over the next year. And you know, while I like the limited or allowing governments to consolidate, I just feel like this piece of legislation doesn't do it just right. So I'm going to be opposed to the bill. Thank you.
Gentleman from Upshur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to speak in opposition to the bill. I thought that gentle lady from Fayette brought up a great point about being able to consolidate across county lines, and I think that this bill just opens us up to a lot of issues, especially with it being so open. So I'm definitely in opposition to this. Thank you.
Further discussion? If not, motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to report the committee substitute for Senate Bill 117 to the floor with the recommendation that it do pass, but that it first be reported to the Committee on Finance.
Roll call. Roll call has been demanded. Is demand sustained? The demand is sustained. Clerk will call the roll.
Vice Chairman Pack. Delegate Angelucci. Delegate Azinger. Delegate Bibby. Delegate Cadle. Delegate Caputo. Delegate DeSario. Delegate Hansen. Delegate Hicks. Delegate Hott. Delegate Jeffries D. Delegate Jeffries J. Delegate Martin. Delegate Nelson. Delegate Painter. Delegate Phillips. Delegate Porterfield. Delegate Piles. Delegate Staggers. Delegate Swartzmiller. Delegate Seipold. Delegate Tomlin. Delegate Walker. Delegate Whirl. Chairman Howell.
There being 8 yeas, 14 nays, the motion does not carry. Next item on the agenda, consideration of committee substitute for SB 352 relating to the Division of Corrections Rehabilitation, acquiring and disposing of services, goods, and commodities. Council will explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the ComSub for Senate Bill 352. The Division of Corrections and Rehab is currently exempt from purchasing, but they do follow a very similar process. The committee substitute modifies the procurement process and by amending it so that it broadens the procurement bonding requirements by making the furnishing of a bond permissive instead of mandatory and expanding the types of surety that may be required. It allows for best value procurement when it's advantageous to the state and setting out the criteria for evaluating best value proposals, allowing the direct award contracts for competitive bidding in instances where only a single source or effectively a single source of the commodity or services available, enumerating various grounds that disqualify a vendor from being awarded a contract. And it also adds a new section that creates a special revenue for funds from the division, sale or disposition of surplus property that it owns, sets out the grounds, procedures, and money is required to be used in maintenance, facility maintenance and repair.
Questions of council? If not, are there amendments? There is an amendment. The committee, please be at ease. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. I declare the motion adopted. Are there further amendments? If not, discussion. Motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to report the committee substitute for Senate Bill 352 as amended to the floor with the recommendation that it do pass as amended, but first be referred to the Committee on Finance.
Question before us is on the gentleman's motion. Roll call's been demanded. Is demand sustained? Demand is sustained. Clerk will call the roll.
Vice Chairman Pack. Delegate Angelucci. Delegate Azinger. Delegate Bibby. Delegate Cadle. Delegate Caputo. Delegate DeSerio. Okay. Delegate DeSerio. Delegate Hansen. Delegate Hicks. Delegate Hott. Delegate Jeffries D. Delegate Jeffries J. Delegate Martin. Delegate Nelson. Delegate Painter. Delegate Phillips. Delegate Porterfield. Delegate Piles. Delegate Staggers. Delegate Schwartzmiller. Delegate Seipold. Delegate Tomlin. Delegate Walker. Delegate Worrell. Chairman Howell. Okay. It's unanimous.
There being 21 yeas and 0 nays, probably passed, so is there any other business come before the committee? If not, gentleman from Grant moves we adjourn. All those in favor? Roll call's been demanded. Is the demand sustained? The demand sustained. Clerk will call the roll. Unanimous consent. All right.